Lawyers Network, Réseau des Avocats Filipino-Canadiens. Thank you for joining us for our legal series. Today's topic is on criminal law, specifically careers in criminal law, and we have two wonderful guests that are joining us. So for FCLN, which is what I'm going to use to refer to the network, the legal series serves a number of purposes. One of them is really to profile our members and to let people know who our members are and their areas of practice. So this is one way of getting to know the members of FCLN. It is also a means for other lawyers to refer clients to the members, and the more they know about them through this legal series, the better it is. It is also a platform for those who want to be mentored. FCLN has a mentorship program, and the mentees may want to know who are the mentors, and those are really the members of the network. It is also part of FCLN's mandate for continuing legal education for the community, not just for the Filipino-Canadian community, but to the general legal profession at large. So for us, for FCLN, the legal series is quite beneficial, and we hope that you will find it as such. So now, to our guest speakers for tonight, Karen Reed. Karen Ann Reed is based in Ottawa, and she has been practicing criminal law for the past, 10 years out of the bar. She said she pursued real estate and family law in favor of criminal law, which she probably finds much more interesting. She's been quite active with the County of Carleton Law Association, and in 2018 was its president. She's also chaired the membership committee of the association from 2016 to date. She, in addition to the County of Carleton Law Association, she's also a member of the Defense Counsel Association of Ottawa, the Criminal Lawyers Association, the Ontario Justice Education Network, and Barristers for Better Bytown. For those of you who are not based in Ottawa, Bytown is actually refers to Ottawa. It was its name before it was changed to Ottawa. Our second guest is David Spence. David Spence is based in Toronto, and he is an assistant crown attorney with the Ministry of the Attorney General in Toronto. His practice focuses on criminal and constitutional law matters. Before he joined the Attorney General, he was a litigator at Stikeman Elliott, focusing on commercial litigation with an emphasis on complex contract disputes, class actions, securities legislation, shareholder disputes, and product liability. He has appeared as co-counsel at all levels of court in Ontario, as well as various domestic and international arbitration panels. The moderator is a director and chairs the Membership and Outreach Committee of FCLN. Lou Jansen Dangzelen is a lawyer focusing on the immigration law. And he is often seen, if you watch on the news, as a commentator for all immigration matters relating not just to Filipino Canadians, but to Canadians in general. So I forgot to mention that I am based in Ottawa, and that Ottawa is on the unceded ancestral lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And we thank them for sharing these lands with us and for all their cultural and other contributions. So Lou, over to you, and Lou will moderate the two speakers with various questions.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to our two guests today. David, and Karen. And thank you to every attendee who is here with us today virtually. Let's get the ball rolling. Now, we are talking about careers in criminal law, and I think there will be a lot of questions. So why don't I start off by firing off some questions? And by the way, guys, if you have questions, please plug them into the chat room. We will be collating them together. And then if someone wants to, put up a question here, I think we'll just insert them as we go along. So why don't we start off with my first question here on my list. And I guess let's start generally. What has your career path been? And why don't we start off with Karen?
Thank you very much, Lou. I thought that when I was in law school that because my undergraduate was science, biology, specifically that I would go into patent and trademark or intellectual property. And I ended up articling at a full service firm. So I basically got exposed to all various areas of law. So for the first 10 years of my practice, I did a mixed practice. I did personal injury, family, real estate, criminal. I did an incorporation once. And round about the 10th year, I covered Gary Barnes, who's a well-known Ottawa practitioner, criminal practitioner, his summer practice. And I guess what I realized is that criminal law was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of law. You don't really make a huge amount of money, but people at, barbecues, some get a kick out of your stories. So anyway, I really, really enjoyed it. And then I started to limit my practice to criminal law. So for over a quarter of a century, I've been exclusively criminal law. And I dropped the other areas of my my practice after about 10 years. So that's how that came about.
Thank you. It's interesting that you said that you didn't start with criminal law. And I think that ties in naturally to what David's path would be. David, what about you? I heard that you started off at Stikeman doing commercial litigation.
Yeah, that's right.
What was your career path like?
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, let me say thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel. As a Filipino-Canadian lawyer, I'm so excited that there is now an association and a group where we can network with other Filipino lawyers and promote the interests of Filipino-Canadians. So thank you for inviting me. As you said, I did start my career as a commercial litigator at a full service firm, Stikeman Elliott, and I was there for about 4 years. In the litigation department. My practice focused primarily on contract disputes, class actions, and a bit of professional liability. And in 2017, I decided to leave the firm to pursue my real passion, which is criminal law. It's not that I didn't like working at Stikeman's. I loved the people. It was great training, but it just wasn't really doing it for me. Company X suing company Y for failing to deliver 1,000 widgets on time just wasn't very interesting to me. I would much rather litigate, cases with, as Karen said, real evidence, real victims like guns and gangs and homicide cases. So that's why I went to the Crown's office, and it's where I've been for the last 4.5 years at College Park Courthouse in downtown Toronto. And I have a very diverse file mix now with an emphasis on sexual violence cases, and in particular, sexual violence involving LGBTQ victims. And that's how my career path took me from Bay Street to public service.
Before I hop on to the next broad topic, I think there's a sub question that is begging to be asked at this point. How was that transition like for the both of you? And I know, Karen, you mentioned that you started to narrow it off, but David, in contrast, was a jump from commercial litigation to criminal law. How did you do this? Was it cold turkey? Was it like setting the pieces together slowly over time? Why don't we start with you this time, David?
It was a bit of cold turkey, as you say. It was really hard. It was a steep learning curve, but the thing about civil litigation is that you kind of are learning a new area of law in each and every case, right? Like I would do one case that was a securities class action and I had to learn about securities law. Then I had another case that was about a water treatment plant and I had to learn all about water and how it's treated and cleaned and filtered. And so you're kind of, that's what civil litigation is. And I already had those instincts. So that enabled me to move into criminal law. And as I said, it was really hard, but I had the litigation instincts and I brought myself up to speed through self-study mostly.
Awesome. What about you, Karen?
I think what happened in my case is that my files just started to drop off. And that was this wouldn't be relevant, I think, to a lot of people who are listening right now, but I think the area of law has become a lot more specialized, right, Alicia? You'd agree with that, in that your own professional liability now is at stake. There's very few dilettantes in the area of law, like who are going to put themselves on the line for being insured for civil litigation, family litigation, high conflict areas where your liability is out there. I'd rather personally pay like the extra amount for full deductible to have the peace of mind when I go to sleep at night, because criminal lawyers are apparently amongst the least sued. I know I'm kind of getting into a very nuts and bolts, monetizing this choice, which isn't really my full motivation back then. But if I could have seen what was coming along, I would have still realized that, you can't really do a lot of things at the same time well if you're doing criminal law, because your clients are very demanding and you can understand why they're demanding. And just picking up on David's career path, we have people who've come to the Crown's office. I can think of Justice Rob Wadden, who was a Crown for a long period of time, respected member of our Carleton County Law Association as well. He came from Faskins in Toronto, where he was doing a litigation commercial practice. And then he came to the Crown's office, and then I can think of other Crowns that came over, and I don't know why, but it just seems to be sort of like the people who become Crowns, they never went back to commercial litigation or litigation. I maybe you can speak to why that happened, David, but we have high quality Crowns with attention to detail in terms of pleadings who have come from civil litigation backgrounds, and not a few criminal defense lawyers as well.
I think there's a common theme of motivation and background in regards to those two answers, which ties nicely into the next question. And maybe I'll start off with Karen this time. Why criminal law, and what about it makes you get up in the morning? A bit more general this time.
Well, there's always something funny going on. Like there's always some, like, whether it's unintended, which is lots of times. Especially with Zoom, people say things which is completely unscripted, and it's really, really funny. Now, some judges find it funny, others don't. But I remember one particular occasion where we were doing a polycom. This is before the COVID pandemic and before the before we're doing Zoom. But we had people doing polycom from the jail, right? They're piped in from the jail, and this guy's face appeared on the screen, and his lawyer wasn't in court and hadn't left instructions with duty counsel. So the Justice of the Peace, Justice Switzer, said, "What, your lawyer isn't here. What do you want to do? Like, do you have any instructions about your case?" And he says, "Well, my lawyer is trying to avoid a certain Crown, so he told me to put the matter over." So of course the whole courtroom cuts up and like starts laughing, and so the client, whose face you can see just on the polycom, goes, "Well, I don't mean any disrespect to you, Mr. or Mrs. Crown, who's there right now." So everybody cuts up even more. But then Justice of the Peace Switzer is like red, like he's just can barely keep breathing. It's so funny. And then he stopped and he says, "I guess I wasn't supposed to say that." Everybody laughs even louder. And then, like, keep in mind, this is some guy, he's in jail, like in a difficult, like probation. And when finally the courtroom hilarity ramps down to like everybody stop laughing. The guy sits there and he goes, "I'm here all week." And it was like so funny. It was just so funny. And you'd never figure that like people in that vulnerable state still have like the grace and the wherewithal to, you know, bring a little bit of levity to everybody else. But I mean, you know, there's a lot of awfulness in criminal law too. Like it's not fun. And I'm not trying to say that whatsoever. I know David's going to agree with me. But out of the darkness that we operate, there are moments of levity, and you have to seize onto those whenever you can, because otherwise it could be a very depressing and bleak and barren landscape.
David, what about you? What makes you want to get up in the morning?
Well, I think the role of Crown Attorney is a really important one. Prosecutors are ministers of justice because they are considered more part of the court than proponents of a cause. And the purpose of a criminal prosecution, as you know, is really not to obtain a conviction, but rather to lay before a jury or a judge all of the relevant evidence relevant to the crime. And so the role of the prosecutor excludes any notion of winning or losing. And I think that's really important. You know, Crown attorneys in Canada are not elected, unlike many district attorneys in the US. And you'll never hear a Crown attorney in Canada boast publicly about raising the conviction rate by 20% over the last 5 years. You might hear something like that in the US though. And in fact, Preet Bharara, in his New York Times bestselling book, Doing Justice, talks about his office having something like a 90% conviction rate when he was the US attorney for the Southern District of New York. So we don't talk about our stats in Canada because our culture really does exclude any notion of winning or losing. The job seeks to ensure justice and fairness, not only for victims of crime, but for accused persons as well. And that's why I think so many people call it a quasi-judicial role. And that's what makes me get up in the morning to do this job that I think is really important.
Upholding the public good. Awesome. I want to shift gears a little bit here from motivation to doing. So I'm also very curious, actually, from the perspective of criminal law. What does an average week look like for you? Maybe let's start with Karen again this time.
Things have changed a lot since Zoom. So the thing is, I'll get up and I'll go on my Zoom, do the remands, which are always first. And then you see whether or not you have a client in bail hearing. You'll receive the phone call at night or maybe at that moment. And then you see if there's any bail hearings that you're going to have to manage throughout the day and interpolate them into whatever else you have going. 10 o'clock is the time that trials begin, but I think, David, you'd agree with me that there's been a diminution in the amount of trials since COVID. A lot of things are being managed. The cases that you're dealing with are probably going to be going ahead, I would imagine, but you're basically, because of Zoom, we're also handling people in different jurisdictions because you don't physically have to travel to other jurisdictions. So you'll have like 2 monitors going plus your cell phone to look at court lists at least. So it's, you know, there's times you can just basically, I guess like other areas of law, you can sit in your seat and not be able to get up. But I'd like to just sort of pick up on what David was saying very briefly, is that apart from the fact that like our crowns are basically ministers of justice and aren't looking to win or lose, they're looking to seek justice. We have a very, I think we've got a really good collegiality between the Crown and defense. I know there's some jurisdictions that don't enjoy that as much as like our own and other smaller bars in Kingston. I don't know what your bar is, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, David, but I miss the physical proximity and the collegiality that we have here in Ottawa with the Crown's office, as social events and educational events that we share together. And just being together in this courthouse family where I say like the courthouse is kind of like, having been there since the place was built in '86, it's kind of like a high school, and the judges are your homeroom teachers, and you have all your all your colleagues in the halls, like and you're making a lot of deals and resolutions just basically en passant in the hallways when you're physically together. And now that all has to be scheduled by phone. And so that kind of denudes us of the personal approach. So it's nice to be able to sit and chat with our colleagues whenever we can over the phone. And I find we're talking a lot more than we used to because we don't get to be together.
Right, like over Zoom and whatnot, indirect communication. From the Crown's perspective this time, David.
So every week is a little different. I usually start my morning in bed, taking the phone off the charger and checking my work emails, as I think many lawyers do these days. I'm in court on average 2 to 3 times per week. Sometimes I attend the courthouse in person. Other times I log into virtual court from home using Zoom. It really depends. If I'm in bail or plea court, I'm appearing via Zoom from home. If I'm attending the courthouse in person, it's usually for an in-person trial, which we have been doing throughout the pandemic with masks and plexiglass and social distancing, of course. Obviously, a lot of this is changing now with return to work. I have carriage of about 200 cases. Some are very serious, like murder and firearms and sexual assaults, and others are not so serious, like thefts from a local retail store, for instance. So I have a very diverse file mix. And when I'm not in court, I'm case managing my files, which means I'm reviewing evidence, trying to decide which cases we should take to trial. I'm meeting with victims of crime. I'm meeting with police officers to prep them for trial. And I'm plea bargaining with defense lawyers. Although in Canada, we don't like to say plea bargaining, we say we're having resolution discussions. So it's typically a Monday to Friday job, although if you have a trial starting Monday morning, then you obviously use the weekend to prep. And from time to time, you're also asked to work bail court on a Saturday or a Sunday. So that's my average work week.
Sounds like a very charged week, as 200 cases in my head. I'm like, which actually ties in very nicely to the next question. I think it kind of answers it. Is this field growing enough so that there's room for new lawyers? And why don't we start with the Crown side this time?
So I'm not sure whether the field is growing, but the criminal court statistics are actually publicly available online. And so I took a look at them today, and I can tell you that according to these statistics, there was a total of about 212,000 new criminal cases in Ontario in 2021, which is a small increase from the 205,000 cases received in 2020, but it's a decrease from the 240,000 new cases received in 2019. So, overall, I think the number of new cases will probably remain stable, which means there should be enough work for everyone. New lawyers might have some difficulties starting a practice with recent cuts to legal aid funding, and Karen can probably speak to that a bit more. But I think there will always be opportunities for people who are genuinely interested and passionate about criminal law and not just using it as a fallback when they can't find something else. I know in the Crown's office, we've been hiring a lot of junior lawyers in the last few years to replace Crowns who have either retired or been appointed to the bench. So in terms of future outlook, I'm not predicting the kind of hiring spree that we've seen in other sectors like M&A and securities and transactional type lawyers, but I think criminal law jobs should remain relatively stable, barring certain, exceptional events like an economic recession, which unfortunately sometimes results in hiring freezes.
Mm.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing those stats, David. I'd like to turn over on the private bar, actually, looking at it from the perspective of, let's say, finding a position. And we know that the majority of lawyers are actually in smaller practice and smaller offices, especially in criminal law. I'm wondering, what's your take, Karen?
There was a huge amount of transition this last year in 2021 from criminal defense bar to the Crown's bar. There was a huge amount of hiring by Crown's office of junior defense lawyers and also more senior defense lawyers. And I thought that obviously made sense from the Crown's point of view, and that they're hiring people who are experienced practitioners. Today, I was in a criminal trial. I was acting for the complainant on a Section 278 application with a colleague of mine who's gone over to the Crown's office. And so it was it was really interesting because I was basically acting as sort of more of a quasi, not defense role, but quasi prosecutorially aligned role, because I was acting for the Crown witness. So that was interesting, but we've, I mean, and I think it was probably a good career path for the young defense lawyers to go, and not so young defense lawyers to go to the Crown's office, because you have a salary, you have benefits. The term Crowns don't, but if you get a full hire, then all of a sudden you have all the things that criminal defense lawyers don't have. You've got a salary, you've got benefits, you've got holidays, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, anytime you could get a job with a salary, I always convince my students, like, go ahead and do it, like seek a position at the Crown's office. And David, thank you for being sensitive about the legal aid issue. What happens with the legal aid certificate is that if everything is resolved at the same time, then basically all your efforts collapse into one pretty insubstantial block fee. So that can be very difficult. And the Crowns, I think, recognize this. Many of them are sensitive about this issue, and they'll indicate a custodial position, being aware of the fact that if an accused person ends up being unrepresented, there's going to be an infinite regression of bench warrants. And then that's going to be difficult to the system. The client's going to end up being arrested, rearrested. So, you know, we need to make sure that people, particularly who are indigent or homeless, are able to get legal aid certificates. And we appreciate the Crown's recognizing of that. But, you know, many of my students, and Carleton University sends me excellent co-op students every single year. And my friend to whom I was referring, who was in the PPSC office in Toronto for years and now has gone over to Guns and Gangs, was my student in 1999. So she's having an illustrious career for over 20 years as a prosecutor. But it's more difficult, obviously, to get a job now. And many of my young students, I said, you might want to consider a parallel degree, go to law school, get a degree, consider a career in policing, because in 4 years, you're going to have a base salary of $110,000 plus court time. Within 5-6 years, you could be making $120,000 a year, full benefits, vacations, etc. So there's lots of things you can do with a law degree if you want to stay in the criminal sphere. And I think particularly now, where policing has been looked upon askance by a lot of people, and even people in the justice system, there are a lot of opportunities for hires as well that people should keep an open mind about.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. What I would also actually pivot to at this point is, in terms of like the feeling of like those, career paths that we have, do you feel like you're making a difference in your job? For example, you've already hinted about like the human feel of like having that moment of levity in court. Why don't we start with you, Karen, on the idea of like making a difference?
Nothing makes me happier than when I'm in a grocery store or doing whatever, and somebody comes up and says, you put me on a different path like X years ago, and I always remember you. And it makes my month. It just makes me so happy. And, I guess, David and I can talk about this. And indeed, I think everybody here can talk about who they think philosophically is a truly evil person. They're those sociopaths and psychopaths that live in society that commit crime. And if you're a really good sociopath, you won't get caught, but some of them do, and we know who they are, and they're celebrated bad people. But a lot of people that get involved in the criminal justice systems are mess up addicts, have had terrible backgrounds. I know one of my friends who's a special constable told somebody in the cell block, if I had your life, I'd be way worse than you. And, hopefully by some of the decisions that we make in conjunction with our colleagues in the Crown's office, can hopefully put people on a better path in life besides just handling the case that comes before us.
What about you, David? In terms of Crown practice, being in an institution like that, it must be a different perspective, but very curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so it's a very public-facing role compared to my job at Stikeman Elliott, where I was only really dealing with senior partners of the firm and private clients who are mostly or almost always corporations. Keep in mind as well that many commercial matters are litigated in private arbitrations that are not open to the public. Contrast that with my current role, where I'm dealing directly with victims of domestic abuse, victims of sexual assault, and all of our matters are litigated publicly in open court. So it's very public facing. And I think I make a difference when I do my best to show the public that the criminal justice system is fair and just for all, including victims and accused persons from diverse backgrounds. My office covers the downtown east side of Toronto, which includes the gay village. And I do think it makes a difference, however small, for people who find themselves in the criminal courts to see justice system participants like myself who are queer and Filipino and reflect the diversity of our urban centers. If I was doing commercial litigation and private arbitrations, the public wouldn't get to see that. So in that way, I do think I'm making a very, very small difference.
Maybe not so small as you think, David. I think you're being very modest.
I second that. Right. Thank you, David and Karen. So we've talked about what it's like, and we talked about how a day is like. I'm also wondering, were there expectations from both of you about this career path, particularly that you found yourself, that would have differed from reality? You had your expectation, and then you had reality, and then they collide. What were the good things? What were the bad things that you found along the way? And why don't we start with David this time?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I was surprised in a good way when I joined the Crown's office that junior lawyers are given the opportunity to run trials on their own at a very early stage in their careers. That's not something that really happens a whole lot in commercial litigation. And part of the reason is that corporate clients who pay, $600, $700, $800, $1,000 an hour don't want a second or third year associate doing the oral arguments or conducting the cross-examinations in court. They want the older gray-haired litigator that's been around for 30, 40 years representing them in court, which doesn't leave a whole lot of opportunities for junior lawyers to get on their feet. And of course, in the Crown's office, we always strive to staff all of our files with fully competent and capable Crown counsel. And I think we do that very well. But unlike, Bay Street, for instance, we can do it with competent junior counsel because we don't have the same economic pressures coming from clients. So when a fourth or a fifth year Crown has proven themselves ready to run a jury trial, we give them a jury trial. So there's lots of opportunities like that in the Crown's office, which I have to say did take me by surprise coming from private practice, but it took me by surprise in a really good way. Criminal law, and I think Karen will agree, is truly one of the last bastions of real courtroom advocacy. And that's what makes it so special.
What's it like, Karen?
I agree with what David said, actually. And when I started, the best thing was to be in the courthouse cafeteria and to sit at the table with the avatars of our bar, with the senior lawyers. And the one thing I really like about our profession is that there isn't an ageism involved. If you're older and senior, you're seen as just as much of a participant and player as anybody who's younger. My father was a medical doctor, and like when you got to a certain age in the medical practice, he practiced till he's after 80, and you had to do competency tests and show basically that you were fit to practice and do surgery. But there was a presumption when you're older in the medical profession that you're kind of lost it, you get pushed out of the OR but in law and in criminal law and any kind of barrister position, we don't have an ageism in our legal profession, and that's something I really like. And the other thing too is I have to say is that like those of us who are senior in law, because we get to interact with our younger colleagues, it keeps us au courant, where what the trends are, helps us with the technology. There's a constant kind of Brownian movement of knowledge that you get osmotically because you're in the fray with colleagues of all ages and backgrounds. So it's a very nice, healthy, rich environment to be in.
We've talked about really nice things so far. Allow me to change.
Get me negative
here a little bit. Yeah.
Talk about legal aid, Sheriff. That'll get me going.
Oh, okay. Actually,
there's some good questions too, actually, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah, but that actually allows me to shift that conversation a bit. So, what is it about your job or career that you see as a big challenge? What is it that you don't like, for example?
Well, I'll tell you what my husband doesn't like is that like people call it all hours of the day. And the thing is, I think, we'll be watching TV and I'll get a phone call at night and, a client will be, like missed court, has a bench warrant, has a warrant in the first instance. So like, what are you going to do? Hang up on them? You just got to that point in the mini series where you're going to find out like what's going on. But, it is an intrusion, but to me, the reason that, my own, a large catchment of my colleagues of my clients are homeless and indigent. So, they're not going to get their own phone to call me during regular hours. So maybe I tend to be more, indulgent than I should be. I always see that like being a criminal defense lawyer is like the dream job for a codependent because you're basically you're burping and diapering and fixing up a lot of problems that people create for themselves, and you do that on a legal aid certificate that's like topped out at a block fee, and so I certainly think that like having boundaries and saying okay, enough is enough. You've got to really keep your game on that. So yesterday when a client called to complain after I got him out, I said, your next phone call is going to be calling to kiss my feet. And we're through right now. And that was the end of the conversation. So it's a skill you have to keep honing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Does that sound negative enough for you? I can come up with more if you want.
For sure.
Okay.
I think a lot of us can relate to that. And I'm actually very curious how that looks like from a bigger institution such as the Crown. David, how about those midnight calls? What do they look like from your end?
Thankfully, I do not get midnight calls or midnight emails. I used to when I was at Stikeman Elliott, but I do not anymore at the Crown Attorney's Office, and for that, I am very grateful. But challenges that I face, I mean, one of the biggest challenges right now is having to triage cases due to limited judicial and court resources. And, court resources have always been scarce, to be sure. That's why we only take about 3.8% of cases to trial province-wide. But because we haven't been able to run jury trials during much of COVID, there's actually a tsunami of cases now at the superior court level waiting for trial. And since everyone, of course, has the right to be tried within a reasonable time, it means that we are forced in some cities, not all, but in many cities, we are forced to triage, which is a big challenge because all of our cases at the superior court level are, of course, prosecuted by indictment, which means they're quite serious. And so I would say that that is the biggest challenge facing our office currently.
Fascinating. I'm actually, in terms of like triage, which is a skill in itself, I'm wondering if the both of you could identify 3 specific skill sets that you think would make you, an effective advocate that is most crucial to succeeding in this career. Let's start off with Karen this time.
I think one thing that one has to remember is that like we're all officers of the court. There are a few people who look upon the defense bar as being somewhat of a lesser player, like as a judicial officer, as a Crown attorney, as a police officer, professional witnesses, and defense lawyers. We're all officers of the court, and we have a duty of truth, candor, and collegiality to the court, amongst other duties. And you always have to remind certain clients that it's not that American TV kind of stereotype that you're there to help the client come up with a good story about what happened, to kind of make all these like evidentiary issues that they're looking at that are problematic for them come together and go away. So that's really important. And then concomitant with that is to remind yourself that we're all employed. All the players in the criminal justice system are employed. We have jobs, we buy our groceries, pay our mortgages, go on vacations, hopefully put aside something in your RSP. We're all employed because there's another group of people in the world who screw up, or who have screwed up, who have addictions, who have paraphilias, who have bad things going on in their life. Sometimes it's not their fault, sometimes it is their fault, but we are employed, and we are basically, as I put it, basically we're making our living off the misery of other people. And so with that, we have to remain compassionate and not think like we're better than they are. And I think as a younger lawyer, I'll say certainly candidly, I was probably a lot more judgy than I am, as like life and wisdom has taught me that, there but for the grace of God could have gone I. And there's a third thing in there somewhere, and maybe after David speaks as eloquently as he does, I'll think of what that third thing is.
David, over to you, put in the hot seat.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Karen said. And I think you need to communicate well in writing and orally, obviously. You need to love to read, because you do a lot of that as a lawyer. And criminal lawyers spend a lot of time in court, sometimes with very little time to prepare. So you need to be able to think on your feet. And if you're a Crown attorney, you need to have good judgment as well, because as a Minister of Justice in your quasi-judicial role, you're frequently called upon to make tough decisions, which I think you should do with your head. But I agree with Karen, you should also do with your heart, because realizing that criminal law really affects real people living real lives.
I got more than 3 from each of you, but carry on, Karen. I think you have more.
Okay, so thank you, David, for that affirmation. It was nice. And I think that like that is where our Crown attorneys in Canada, picking up off the British legal tradition, where they're ministers of justice and they don't seek to win or lose. That's where we have common cause. And I think that that's where being an officer of the court is so much more palpable, because we're not in that kind of divide, the public perception as things are in the United States, whereas David pointed out, like, people are elected and they want to go in their law and order to the exclusion of all else. But the one thing I have to say is really, really important is when you're an advocate and you're going to court, is really, really important to when you have a trial, you go in, people, like, some people go in and they'll say hi to the Crown, like, you know, or some Crowns likewise will say hello to the defense lawyer, greet the judge. Well, there's the court reporter and the clerks who are hardworking professional people. And I'm telling you, the clerks basically run the courthouse. They're the beating heart of the courthouse, and the reporters. And if you don't have the collegiality and respect to greet them as if they're just as important participants in this fraternity, sorority, it's not going to be good for you, and it's not going to be fun for you. I mean, you have to remember those things. As a lawyer, if I see witnesses waiting outside, Crown witnesses, I'll go up and I'll introduce myself. I'll be asking questions later on today, kind of like, and the police, because it's just polite. It's just, you know, it's the kind of thing you do. You know, you went to somebody's house and there are a bunch of people you didn't know, you just introduce yourself. And I think, like, quite apart from being polite and professional, then you don't get somebody who's sitting there terrified of you, and it puts them at ease. And I think from your point of view as a cross-examiner, they're probably going to be more forthcoming with you, and then you don't have to argue over silly little stuff if they see you as a polite, personable human being. So those are just a couple of tips I'm just throwing in there that probably had nothing to do with your question.
Well, actually, it dovetails into the next question, which was about the best piece of advice that you can give.
Great. So, like, I already answered. You can turn it over to David.
Yeah. So, David, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I can't speak too much for the defense bar. Karen can talk to that. But I think if you're a law student and you're interested in joining the Crown's office, then you should try to summer an article at the Crown's office. That will enable you to apply for contract positions with the Crown's office, which are generally restricted to internal applicants only. They're rarely open to the public. If you're already practicing as a civil lawyer or other type of lawyer, for instance, then I think you probably need to start as a per diem contract Crown, which is kind of like being a substitute teacher. You get called to fill gaps in staffing, like when someone calls in sick, for instance, and you can build a bit of a profile doing that. Management will get to know you, and they'll hopefully offer you a short-term contract, which could turn into something more permanent. So that's the advice I would give for someone looking to move into the area. But I can't speak, I'm not sure about the defense side.
And working at the student legal aid office as well is really good, because then you get yourself noticed as you're constantly in court, and then they know that this person knows court procedure and knows how to handle standing on their hind legs and speaking in court. So definitely, if you can do that, or help out at the duty counsel office, if you're in the milieu, you already have a foot in the door.
Fantastic. Actually, wondering, Karen, what your thoughts are about where the industry and the defense bar, where is it going into the future? What does it look like? You've hinted about it earlier, but could you talk about more about that?
Well, I think it's sort of very much like, it's almost like an ecological thing, like with the growth in the Crown's office and the hires off. Some people would say poaching, but I mean, frankly, if I was hiring for the Crown's office, I would pick experienced members of the criminal defense bar, young members. With that lateral shift, there opened up more opportunities for the for hires in the criminal defense bar. So you never know where you're going to be. It's like an economic cycle. You never know where you're going to be. So I'm sorry I can't hand any predictors to anybody who's here, but certainly I think I agree with what David said, like you offer yourself up as a per diem. And the fact, and I've seen some of the questions like Chris Kim was asking about if you're coming from a civil litigator for full service firm, certainly from David's experience and judges and crowns that I know, that doesn't foreclose you. If anything, it gives you like a step up because you're coming with diverse experience. You could do fraud cases, you can do complex tax litigation cases, and you keep yourself open to being hired by PPSC or the Crown's office. And you know, I think when the courthouse opens and there's more chances to sit and observe trials and, you know, speak with the Crown attorneys, you're getting more tips as to when the hires come up.
Fantastic. I have a question here about life-work balance, which I think kind of dovetails into Warren's question about criminal law having that perception of being heavy. So the question, it's twofold. What's life-work balance, first of all, in criminal law, both at the private defense bar and over at the Crown? And how do you de-stress or take a break, for example? Let's start with Karen this time. I
saw Warren's question and I definitely wanted to answer that because I don't know. It's sort of like I've been chained to the oar for so long that I don't really know what it's like to have a work-life balance. So it's kind of like a worker ant. You know, I got another piece of an oak leaf in my mouth and I don't know how to put it down and I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't have it in my mouth. So I guess that's part of it. But one of the, I guess, let me just see here. De-stress, take a break. I'm trying to, you know, just do pick up sports where you can. Like I think it's really important to stay physically healthy. And you know, nutrition. I don't get enough sleep. I should get more sleep. So that's really important. It's kind of like the ABCs. Like it's a very boringly intuitive answer. Sorry about that, Warren, but just don't turn down any offers of diversion from your friends. Like get out as much as you can. And you know, if you got to put in a few late nights to make up for the fact that, you know, you would otherwise not be ready for court because you went out with your friends, you should probably not turn your friends down.
What about you, David? How do you de-stress? How do you take a break?
So I totally agree with Karen. I think diet and nutrition and exercise is so important. I do CrossFit 4 times a week. I can do that because I don't have kids. And one of the other things I do is I turn off the chime and desktop notification in Outlook for when I receive a new email, because I find that it's very disruptive. So I receive a new email probably once every 5 to 10 minutes. And I don't want to be interrupted by that chime or notification because I know that if I hear it or if I see it, I will stop whatever I'm doing and check to see who emailed me. The millennial urge to do that is just too strong, at least for me. And I think that's an urge that everyone is getting now these days. And remember that email is supposed to be a form of asynchronous communication. You're not entitled to an immediate response. You might be if you're, you know, doing corporate law and you're working on a closing, but as a criminal lawyer, at least, there's no reason why you should be expected to respond to an email immediately. And I think that's true for a lot of different practice areas. And the second thing I do is I take walks during the day, especially with remote work. Otherwise, you can end up going really days without leaving the house sometimes. 1 or 2 walks during the day can really help clear your mind and help you stay productive. And, you know, I can't say that I've struck a perfect work-life balance yet. I continue to check my work phone on weekends and even when I'm on vacation. I think because I was raised in private practice, it's just kind of part of my DNA now to do that. And I actually get more stressed if I don't check my work phone. So, you know, I'm giving you tips on work-life balance, but also recognizing that I still have a lot of room to improve in that area myself.
smiles from our colleagues over here in the webinar. I want to do a quick fire round, essentially, just a few fun questions before we further open up the panel for more questions from the attendees. Curious, to de-stress perhaps, one would pick up a book. What's currently on your bedside table, David? What are you reading right now?
I am reading The Alice Network by Kate Quinn.
What about you, Karen? What are you reading these days, if you are, or what keeps you distracted from work?
My dad was an aficionado of old ghost stories like M.R. James and things like that. So I keep rereading those, and I always like rereading Lord of the Rings, and I guess I'm an Anglophile of, kind of Old English literature, Victorian, Edwardian. So I don't read it all the time, but I just had one of my clients who had a warrant in the first instance outstanding. It was a pretty bright guy. I just sent him a copy of an M.R. James ghost story that says, "If you don't come to me, I will come to you." And I don't know if any of you've seen that, but it sort of set the tenor, and he turned himself in. So I mean, it does have its utility.
Let's move on to something a bit more sinful. The vice of our last 10 years, I would say. What are you currently binging on right now on TV, Karen?
I haven't seen anything that I really, really like these days. So we'll start a series and go like, oh, we either like it or we don't like it. I mean, we started watching like the the grifty series like Dirty John. We're going to watch Anna Delvey, The Tinder Swindler, things like that. It's sort of like, like watching like the romance scams. They all tend to have a particularity, but I've got to see the best mini series that I have seen so far is Happy Valley, which is, as we're in the profession, right? So you see these like legal series and you go like, that's not what happens. Like, why is that lawyer cross-examining your own witness? And, well, they're not excluding witnesses. And you start watching these series and you're going like, this is complete BS. I mean, and you can't stand it, click, you turn it off. But Happy Valley, which is about a Yorkshire officer, and all the players in that system, is actually pretty close to, I think it's like pretty realistic. And then I always like Rumpole of the Bailey because it depicted the collegiality between the various members of that profession, but it's pretty old. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but Rumpole had a lot of things that we have in our profession. Like he had a family, he always acted for the Timpsons, and any criminal practitioner will have like a family where you're acting for mom, dad, cousin, in-law, etc. like that. So I found that was pretty realistic as depicted. So Happy Valley, Rumpole, you won't be disappointed.
David.
Survivor, season 41.
They're at season 41? Oh my God. On Netflix, the usual stuff, I guess. So you when they dump let's say 10 episodes, would you dare submerge a Friday night and emerge on a Sunday or something?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love that show.
Good. Lou, I think we have to open up the floor to the participants. So
actually, go ahead.
Are there any questions from any of the attendees to either Karen or David that you would want to ask? No?
Hi.
Oh, there.
Hi, my name's Jun, and I'm a international trained lawyer, and I just finished my LLM, and I'm doing articling in a legal clinic. But I do wondering, because I used to be a prosecutor in China, but I grew my interest in criminal law since then. But I just want to thank you all the tips you two gives, and it's very helpful. But my question is about, as an international trade lawyer, who still facing like language barriers and no background in Canada, or what place, such and such. What advice do you give if like me to want to do criminal law?
Can I take a stab at that? So I think it's always really good to sit in and watch trials, and you could do that by Zoom as well. So you could get the Zoom coordinates and watch trials. And what I would always tell people who are interested in watching trials is don't get yourself like stuck watching like a fraud or an impaired trial. I mean, there might be some short snapper of an impaired trial where you can see like the witnesses all in one day, but you're probably better off if you want to see a trial that will begin and end in a day, so that you're not stuck. You know, if you watch a homicide, right, David, you're going to be, well, there's going to be 3 days watching the SOCO, scene of crime officers. Like, here's like an exhibit. Here's the highlighter that we found at the scene. This is my initials. This is number 34 exhibit. Here's like the whiteout pen. This is exhibit number 536. And by then you'll have just gone asleep. So you probably want to watch an assault trial. And then that way it's easy to follow, and it's easy to see how the witnesses on either side line up. And then when you get a sense of how trials work, then it's easy to watch pretty well any other kind of trial.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I would just add to that. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, I mean, I'm sure you have, Canada is a very diverse country. There are a lot of Chinese Canadians. There is huge demand for lawyers who speak Mandarin or Cantonese. So I think you should use that to your advantage. Maybe you won't, be able to do a 100% criminal law practice, but if you do a bit of criminal law, maybe a bit of immigration law, a bit of civil litigation, I think if you're in a large urban center like the GTA, that you will find enough clients who are looking for lawyers like you who can speak the language.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful evening. And just like Jun, I'm also an internationally trained lawyer. I come from India. I immigrated here a couple of years ago, and then so my profile, my background is mostly on the corporate side. And now that I got a chance to I'm going to go through the NCAs, the national accreditation process. What advice would you give to somebody, again, who doesn't have Canadian connections? And more particularly, when I'm now in the process of applying for articling positions. And how does it look for someone to explain that, well, you've done corporate work all your life, why now criminal law? Like, how do I demonstrate an interest for criminal law? Like, is it necessary to show that, well, you need to have XYZ experience in order to, come into criminal law? That's one question. And the second question is, I'm also a member of the LGBTQ community. And so I have been told that as a member of the LGBTQ community, this is not the place for you. It's more for people who are kind of like tough and rough and, so is that true?
No, sorry, I'm not at all. This is, we have a very diverse culture in Canada, and we have a very diverse defense bar and Crown's office, and we have diverse police forces, both in terms of ethnic background and gender identity. Not at all. I think everybody brings a strength and insight into human nature with a different background. But like, I would repeat what I was saying, that I think it's really, really important. Like, you're a lawyer. You think like a lawyer. You think like a lawyer around the world. Like, we all have like critical analysis skills. So what I think you should do is you should go into Zoom courts. You don't even have to physically go into court. Like, it's great going physically into courts because you meet people, but I'm just saying that, you know, commuting and you know, moving around and still a pandemic landscape, I still think it's good, you know, to go in by Zoom. You can go from your living room or whatever, wherever you're sitting, and watch trials. And I can give my cell phone number and my email, and I'm happy to give links to Zoom courts so that you can go in and you can physically watch trials that start typically at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they go up to about what, noon 30, David, 12:30. They start again at 2, and you know, whatever you're doing, you can follow along with your earbud about this. It's better to actually watch, because then you can see what team is going up, right? Like who's physically going into the witness box. But I think it's really good to watch Zoom trials. There's certain trials you can't see, like youth trials and, you know, some sexual assault trials where people are, you know, where the proceedings are foreclosed. But you know, you can see a lot of trials, and then you sit and you get an idea of what's going on, and then you approach various players and say, I've steeped myself, and this is what I understand about the criminal process, and you show that you're savvy, and you know, people are happy to take a trained lawyer on.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, we've had 3 openly gay Crown attorneys appointed to the bench to become judges within the last 2 years. The head Crown attorney for Etobicoke is an openly gay man. The head Crown attorney for North York was an openly gay man. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I actually think corporate M&A and securities law in Bay Street is more of a machismo hetero culture than criminal law is.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, that's
Great.
perfect.
Thank
Any
you
other
so much.
questions before we close? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Karen and
If
David.
anybody, shall I put out my cell number, for example? And
Sure,
or
you can
I
put it
can,
in the chat box.
okay, I'll put it in the chat box. Okay.
So I actually refer all of my clients with, we need criminal advice to Karen. And it's definitely all of the Filipino Canadians in Ottawa, you know, that run into some criminal activities, you know, so she gets it. But she always says there are not that many Filipino Canadians that break the law. So anyway, so happy to have her here. And David, thank you very much for joining us. And to all of you who are present, please consider becoming a member of FCLN, and let us know what interests you. We actually started sort of a partnership with the Osgood Historical Society, and we were going to chronicle lawyers, Filipino Canadian lawyers across Canada. So that is something that, you know, will be of use to Filipino Canadian lawyers historically, so that they will know that there were Filipino Canadians that started in Canada way before them. The other is that, of course, you know, as part of that, in order to chronicle, we need some volunteers. You know, we need people that would like to interview those lawyers. And if you do, please let us know. Our next series on the legal series is on April, I think it's April 21, and it will deal with family law. And we have 2 family law lawyers, one in Osgood, I think, in Osgood County, the other one in Toronto. And then the moderator is actually a Filipino Canadian who is a Filipino lawyer in the Philippines and has maintained her Philippine bar. So there's several issues there that may interest you. And again, please consider a membership with our association. It doesn't cost much for students, it's only $25, and it's only $50 for other lawyers and other members. So until then, thank you very much. Thank you, Lou, for moderating. You did a great job, and as always. So If you watch Omni News, you'll see Lou commenting. Oh, by the way, Lou will actually lead an immigration law seminar in May. So after family law will come Lou's seminar on immigration law with another Filipino Canadian lawyer who practices in that area. So on that, thank you everyone. Good evening and see you soon. Bye-bye all. Thank you.
Great.